experience, and it took everybody working together, but we were successful, and we had 8 years with the greatest peacetime expansion of the economy, 23 million new jobs, incomes going up for everybody. It sounds like something we want to do again. So I'm happy to be here with people who have the same goals. I'm grateful to all of you here. Frank, thank you, Secretary Treasurer. And I want to thank my friend of many years, Congressman Bob Brady, who I saw coming in. He told me he'd warmed you up. I hope that's the case, because it was good to see him, but you know, I told him he had to get back to work because we had a lot to do here in Philadelphia. I also am delighted that one of my great friends from New York, who's now the head of the AFT, Randy Weingarten, is here with us. You know, the AFL-CIO is showing every day that when unions are strong, families are strong, and America is strong. And that's exactly the message we have to take to the country. So it's especially timely to be here in Philadelphia, especially this week. This has been one wild election year. We're looking forward to an exciting and successful primary here on April 26th. But, you know, every time I think politics has a lot of drama, something happens, like that Villanova game at the end. Bill and I both got home, and we were watching it, sitting on the edge of our seats. It was so exciting, it nearly made my husband forget and forgive Villanova for beating his alma mater, Georgetown, back in 1985. But I love those come-from-behind victories. I understand you're going to have a parade for the team, and that is incredibly fitting, and I hope that the weather is good because they deserve all the accolades that you can give them. You know, some of you know Pennsylvania has always been a special place for me. My grandfather and his family arrived as immigrants to Scranton, Pennsylvania, back in the late 1880s. And my grandfather worked at the Scranton Lace Mills for 50 years. That's where my dad and my brothers, my dad grew up, my brothers and I spent a lot of wonderful time there. My grandfather lived in a duplex in Scranton on Diamond Avenue. We went to the Court Street Methodist Church. He built with his own hands and the help of his friends and others a cottage on Lake Winola. So we spent a lot of time driving around Pennsylvania because we took every route we could imagine, coming from Chicago, which is where I was born and where my family lived. A lot of those experiences really embedded deep in my heart how to respect the dignity of hard work. And if you do your part, you and your family should be able to get ahead and stay ahead. That, to me, is the promise of America. It kept my grandfather working in the mills every day, day after day, year after year, until he retired at the age of 65. He was so proud of the work he did. And the people around him were proud of it too. People who made things were given respect and dignity. And we got to get back to doing that. My dad started his own small business, but we worked in it. He printed drapery fabrics and big long tables in a little print plant. And my mother, my brothers, and I would show up and we'd help move the squeegee across the silk screen to put the paint on the fabric. So I grew up believing in and honoring hard work. It provided us with a good middle-class life. And it is what has inspired generations of union members to organize, to bargain, to march, even strike for fair pay, decent working conditions, a voice on the job. I think that's in part what is at stake in this election. We've got other candidates talking about building walls and pitting Americans against each other, right? My campaign is about breaking down all the barriers holding working families back. My campaign's about building again those ladders of opportunity and empowerment so people can claim their own piece of the American dream. They can realize the promise of America. Imagine with me a tomorrow where every child in this country has the opportunity to live up to his or her God-given potential, no matter where they're from or what they look like or who their parents are. That's the future we have to build together. Now, I think our next president's going to face three big tests. First, can you deliver results that improve people's lives and move us toward that better future? Second, can you keep us safe? Third, can you bring the country together? Now, all three are vitally important, but I want to focus on that first test. Every candidate asking for your vote owes it to you to be clear about how we are actually going to keep our promises and deliver more growth and fairness to this economy. Ask any parent and you'll hear nothing's more important than making sure their kids have a good school and a good teacher, no matter what zip code they live in. They deserve a president who understands that when we invest in a child's education, we're investing in a stronger economy for everyone. People who've spent their whole lives working hard deserve a president who will protect Social Security and expand it for those who need it most, not cut it or privatize it. And families deserve a president who will fight for the things that are priorities in people's homes, even if they're not priorities in Washington. Affordable child care, paid leave, and something we've waited long enough for, equal pay for women. And most of all, hardworking Americans deserve a president with a real plan to create good jobs with rising incomes across our country. Because despite all the progress we've made, and I don't think President Obama gets the credit he deserves for saving our economy from the mess that the Republicans left. But there still aren't enough good-paying jobs that can support a middle-class life. The typical middle-class family is making $4,000 less than they were 15 years ago in my husband's last year as president. So if you haven't had a raise in 15 years, you start to wonder, how am I ever going to give my kids the opportunities they deserve? And if you're doing the same jobs your parents did, but for less money and fewer benefits, it is hard to look to the future with confidence and optimism. So I understand why some people are angry. This is not the way it's supposed to be in America. But I also know people are hungry for solutions and leadership, and that is what I am offering. My opponent in the Democratic Party and I share many of the same progressive goals. We agree that wages are too low and inequality is too high. We see middle-class families getting crushed by the cost of everything from child care to college to prescription drugs. And we both want to make our economy work for everyone, not just those at the top. But Senator Sanders and I have some real differences about how we would go about achieving our goals as president. And like a lot of people, I am concerned that some of his ideas just won't work because the numbers don't add up. Others won't even pass Congress, or they rely on Republican governors suddenly having a conversion experience and becoming progressives. Well, in a number of important areas, he doesn't have a plan at all. Now, sometimes I'm accused of spending too much time on the details of how things actually work and how we get them done. But if you don't do that, it would be like negotiating a contract. And you walk in and you say to the employer, we want a really good deal, so do it. It's not the way I've ever seen it work. You got to know what you want. You got to have a plan for getting it, or people aren't going to get the help that they need. That's what this is supposed to be about. As union members, you know better than anybody that hard work is the only way to get the job done. When you build something, you build it right. And you deserve a president who will work as hard as you do, who will get results the way you do every day, and who will always have your back. And for me, and it's not just because I'm here, I say this all over, it starts with having a strong and vibrant labor movement that is supported in the White House and across the country. You see, I think it's pretty clear. Unions helped build the greatest middle class in the history of the world here in Pennsylvania and across the United States. When unions are strong, wages go up for both union and non-union families. The middle class expands, and the entire economy is more dynamic for everyone. Now, the reverse is also true. When unions are weak and workers lose their voice and their bargaining power, incomes stagnate, inequality grows, and families suffer. So we together have to stand up to those forces trying to weaken the labor movement and tell them, not on our watch. We are going to stand firm together in favor of what unions have done, are doing, and will do. Now, this is important on another front. Today, America's unions are at the forefront of so many crucial progressive movements, including the fight to raise the minimum wage. And this is an exciting moment. The victories are starting to roll in. Millions of working families in New York and California are poised to climb out of poverty. And I fully support Governor Wolf in his fight to raise the minimum wage in Pennsylvania as well. This is what a movement looks like. And Americans owe a debt of gratitude to the fast food workers and the retail workers and in New York airport workers and others who marched in the street, to the rank-and-file laborers from the public and private sector, to everyone from home care workers to child care workers who are standing up and saying, we have to do better. This kind of grassroots mobilization is essential. Now, the Republican frontrunner, in case you haven't heard, actually says wages are too high. Yeah, I said the other day in New York, it's time he gets out of one of those towers named for himself and start talking to folks who are like working for a living all over, right? But he's not alone. Republican governors and legislatures are waging a relentless assault on workers' rights. Ted Cruz and other Republicans are pushing a national right-to-work law that would gut unions, drive down wages and benefits, and concentrate even more power in the hands of corporations and their allies. Right to work is wrong for workers and wrong for America. So here, Here's my promise to you. If I'm fortunate enough to be elected president, organized labor will always have a champion in the White House and a seat at the table. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look at my record. As Rick said, 100%. As a senator, I was an original co-sponsor of the Employee Free Choice Act. And as president, I will use the bully pulpit and the Department of Labor to stand with you to defend worker bargaining power and help unions grow. Because if we want better jobs and wages, we need stronger unions. Now let me walk through some of the other fights we have to wage and win to make sure the good jobs of the future end up here in Pennsylvania and across America. First, we need to drive a manufacturing renaissance in this country and make major new investments in infrastructure, small business, and clean energy. Someone's going to be the clean energy superpower of the 21st century. It's either going to be China, Germany, or us. I want it to be us. With your help, it will be us. Under my infrastructure plan, we'll put millions of Americans to work, modernizing our roads, our bridges, our railways, our ports, our airports, our water systems, our sewer systems, our pipelines, and a lot of them will be really good union jobs because we're going to give the building trades the chance to help us rebuild America for the 21st century. We'll finish the job of connecting all of America's homes to high-speed internet. And when I mention the water system, you've all heard about Flint, Michigan, right? It's not the only place. There are lots of places in the Northeast and the Midwest where the water is not as safe as it could be and where we lose a lot of water, one of our most precious resources, because of leaks. So we're going to get to work together. And we can rebuild our country. And these are jobs that can't be outsourced. These are jobs that have to be done right here. You know, I never gave up on manufacturing when I was a senator from New York. Communities like Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, across our state, I reached across the aisle to found the Bipartisan Manufacturing Caucus. Just last week, I was in Syracuse and called for a new $10 billion effort to bring together workers, unions, businesses, universities, and governments at every level to create new manufacturing jobs across America. It will go hand in hand with a new manufacturing renaissance tax credit that I'm proposing to encourage investments in communities that have been hit hard by layoffs and plant closings. And I know there are a lot of those here in Pennsylvania. American workers don't quit, and we can't quit on our workers. We have to lift up manufacturing again so people can loudly and proudly say, yes, we can make it in America. So I will work on this every day as your president. Second, it's time for more businesses to start treating workers as assets to be invested in, not costs to be cut. And that is why I've proposed specific new incentives for companies to share profits with employees on top of good wages. Because when corporations do well, all the benefits shouldn't go just to the CEOs and the shareholders. The workers who actually produce those profits ought to be rewarded as well. And we are going to force companies that ship jobs overseas to give back any tax breaks that they receive from local, county, state, or federal government. And if corporations do try to move their headquarters to a foreign country to skip out on their tax bills, we're going to slap a new exit tax on them. And we're going to put that money to work in the communities left behind. I'm really proud that the Treasury Secretary and the President yesterday announced tough new rules on this gimmick that companies are using. You know, they call it an inversion. I call it a perversion. It's wrong. It's got to stop. what President Obama announced is a good start, and I'm glad that Pfizer has decided to give up on its own inversion scheme. But we got to build on this progress, and we really have to slam the door on these abuses. They're wrong for American workers, but they're also wrong for the American economy. And some of you may have just heard about these disclosures about outrageous tax havens and loopholes that super-rich people across the world are exploiting in Panama and elsewhere. Now, some of this behavior is clearly against the law, and everyone who violates the law anywhere should be held accountable. But it's also scandalous how much is actually legal. That's why last year I proposed a plan to shut down the so-called private tax system for the mega wealthy. We're going after all these scams and make sure that everyone pays their fair share here in America. I'm going to hold them accountable, and we're going to have a special effort to track all these resources wherever they might lead. Now, third, we need smarter, fairer trade policies. And there's been a lot of distortions about my record on trade. You'll probably hear it during the next couple of weeks. So I want to set things straight and ask you to tell your friends. My message to every worker in Pennsylvania, every worker across America is this: I will stand with you, I will have your back, and I will stop dead in its tracks any trade deal that hurts America. Again, don't just take what I'm saying. Look at the record. I opposed the only multilateral trade deal that came up when I was in the Senate. It was called CAFTA, because I thought it was bad for American jobs. As Secretary of State, I fought for American manufacturers against China's cheating. And when the Trans-Pacific Partnership was finally completed and we could all see what was in it, I opposed it, because I didn't think I could look in the eyes of any American worker and say, this deal will create more jobs and raise your wages. But we need a president who doesn't just complain about trade. We need a president who knows how to compete against the rest of the world and win for America and for American workers. And that means, first and foremost, standing up to China, which is the biggest abuser of global trade. China illegally our markets, steals our trade secrets, plays games with their currency, gives unfair advantages to state-owned enterprises, and discriminates against American companies. Now, this is a trend, and we've got to break it. When I represented New York, one of the companies that had been around for 150 years there, Corning Glass, was targeted by absurd tariffs and intellectual property theft and other unfair treatment from China. Good American jobs were at stake, so I took on the Chinese government, and I pushed the Bush administration, going all the way to President Bush, to get them to join me to add to the pressure. Eventually, we got Beijing to back down. Now, recently, the Chinese economy has stalled, while our economy keeps moving forward. It grew at the slowest rate in a quarter of a century last year. So in the coming months, their behavior could get even worse. Their abuses could be even more prominent and prevalent. They may try to solve their problems at home by further taking advantage of American workers and markets. So the next president has to understand the games Beijing plays and be prepared to stop them. We've all seen what happens when a president can't or won't stand up to China. That is exactly what happened when the Bush administration repeatedly refused to enforce our trade laws, even as millions of American manufacturing jobs were lost. We gained manufacturing jobs when Bill was president. We lost them dramatically when George W. Bush was president. We can't let that happen again. I want to ramp up trade enforcement. I'm going to get really tough by appointing a new chief trade prosecutor that reports directly to me. We will triple the number of trade enforcement officers and make sure the government has the resources to bring new cases, rather than leaving the burden on workers, industries, and unions. And we'll start building an early warning system so we can intervene even before trade violations cost American jobs. Now, one of the most important battles is going to be over steel, something you know a lot about here in Pennsylvania. China and other countries have been dumping artificially cheap steel into our markets to gain an unfair advantage. That causes prices to plummet, and American steel companies and steel workers pay the price. It's illegal, plain and simple. Steel is a crucial part of our manufacturing base, and I believe it is crucial to our national security. So we cannot let this vital industry get chipped away and even disappear. As a senator, I testified before the International Trade Commission to protect New York's steel industry from dumping. I spent years advocating for retirees of Bethlehem Steel who developed cancer and other long-term health problems after helping to build nuclear weapons for our military during the Cold War. As president, I will go to bat again for our steel workers. We will throw the book at China for their illegal actions. The federal government should join the steel industry and the steel workers in bringing trade cases against China to stop illegal dumping. We should do it now. We should also reject weak automobile rules of origin provisions in trade agreements, which give Chinese steel production and other products an unfair backdoor to U.S. markets. Still Chinese steel, even when a Japanese automaker is the one selling it. Now, none of this is going to be easy, but I've gone toe-to-toe with China's top leaders on some of the toughest issues we face, from cyber attacks to human rights to climate change to trade and more. I know how they operate, and they know if I'm their president, they're going to have to toe the line, because we're going to once and for all get fair treatment, or they're not going to get access to our markets. You know, when you know how somebody operates, and you know they're always trying to game the system, and you know that they really don't care about the rules of the road, you have to get tough, and you have to be ready to really draw the line. And I think we're at that point. And I believe that what I've done and what I have seen in the marketplace and how I have dealt with the Chinese over a number of years on a lot of these issues gives me the kind of grip on the problem that the next president really, really needs. But I can't do any of this without your help. I am proud to have the support of so many unions. I'm proud to be here today speaking to all of you. We've got a primary coming up on April 26th. I'm going to work hard across this Commonwealth, as hard as I can, to reach out and meet as many voters, but I can't do all of that without your help. I need you to speak up and speak out to your friends, your neighbors, people you come in contact with, because this is one of the most consequential elections in our nation's history. I want to knock down all the barriers that are holding people back. And I was thinking about this the other day when we announced the great accomplishment of raising the minimum wage in New York, and I was invited by the governor to be with him when that bill was signed. And I was reminded this week is the anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was in Memphis supporting striking sanitation workers, members of AFSCME Local 1733. He was standing with them in their quest for better wages and safer working conditions. What is more American than that? Those workers were seeking dignity, fairness, and justice. So, of course, he was there. In his final speech, before he was killed, Dr. King said, "Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be." That is still our mission, my friends. And I believe with all my heart, we indeed can make America what it ought to be if we do it together. Instead of being divided, instead of having the name-calling and the finger-pointing, which only makes those who are powerful very happy. Because the more we are divided, the less we can unite against them. But if we reach for love and kindness and respect instead of bluster and bigotry, if we lift each other up instead of tearing each other down, if we stay true to the promise of America, there is no challenge we can't meet or no barrier we can't break. So I am proud to be with you, my friends. Thank you. Thanks to the